When royal guards dragged bone mechanic Rhea Calder into the throne room of the most feared dragon warlord in the volcanic frontier, everyone expected her to beg. Instead, she did the unthinkable. She told King Draxion Vyre that his court sorcerers were idiots and his centuries-old spinal curse could be fixed with her bare hands. In a kingdom where strength was law and magic was gospel, the slum-born outsider with grease under her nails just declared war on tradition itself. What happens next will shatter a fortress, rewrite royal law, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't fire or steel, it's knowledge. If you want to see how a mechanic survives in a world of dragons, stick around until the end. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. The smoke from the volcanic vents never cleared in the Ashmark district. It hung in the air like a curse, thick and acrid, staining everything the color of old blood. The slums sprawled across the southern edge of the frontier kingdom like a wound that refused to heal. Crooked shacks built from scavenged metal, rope bridges strung between crumbling towers, and everywhere the smell of sulfur mixed with desperation. Rhea Calder had been working since dawn, elbow deep in the torn wing membrane of a courier drake that had crashed into the market 2 days prior. The creature was sprawled across her workshop floor, whimpering and thrashing whenever she touched the damaged tissue. Its owner, a nervous merchant with sweat stains spreading across his shirt, hovered nearby, wringing his hands. "Please," he said for the 5th time. "The royal healers said it was beyond saving. They said I should put it down." Rhea didn't look up. Her fingers moved along the edge of the tear, mapping the damage with the kind of precision that came from years of practice. "The royal healers are trained to throw magic at problems until they go away. They don't know shit about actual anatomy." The merchant flinched. Speaking against the court wasn't wise, even in the slums. But Rhea had stopped caring about wise a long time ago. She'd been fixing what magic couldn't heal for 8 years now. Bone mechanics weren't common. Most people with the skill worked in the military or died young trying to fix creatures too dangerous to touch. Rhea had started at 14 when a mining accident crushed her father's leg, and the healers said he'd never walk again. She'd rebuilt the joint herself using wire, salvaged metal pins, and an anatomy textbook she'd stolen from a university student. Her father walked. The healers called it impossible. She called it Tuesday. "Hold him steady," Rhea said, reaching for a curved needle and a spool of reinforced thread. The drake's owner grabbed the creature's head, murmuring soothing nonsense while Rhea worked. Her hands moved fast, stitching the membrane back together with a technique that was half surgery, half engineering. She didn't use magic. She didn't need it. Understanding how a body worked was better than any spell. 20 minutes later, the drake was bandaged, sedated, and breathing steadily. The merchant nearly cried with relief. "How much do I owe you?" 40 silver. Rhea wiped the blood off her hands with a rag that had seen better days. "And if anyone asks, you got this done at the North Market. I don't need attention." He paid without argument and left quickly, the drake limping behind him on a makeshift leash. Rhea locked the workshop door and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to feel the exhaustion pressing down on her spine. Then she got back to work. There was always more work. She didn't hear the soldiers until they were already inside. The door slammed open, lock broken, hinges screaming. 3 royal enforcers filled her cramped workshop, their black armor polished to a shine that didn't belong in the slums. The lead guard was a massive man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. "Rhea Calder?" She stood slowly, keeping her hands visible. "That's me. You're coming with us." Her stomach dropped, but she kept her face blank. "For what?" "The king requires your services." That stopped her cold. The king, Draxion Vyre, the dragon warlord who ruled the entire volcanic frontier with a combination of raw power and absolute brutality. The kind of man who crushed rebellions by incinerating entire villages and displayed the charred remains on pikes along the trade roads. "I don't work for the crown," Rhea said carefully. "You've got the wrong person." The scarred guard stepped forward. "We don't have the wrong person, and you don't have a choice." They didn't give her time to grab anything, didn't let her change out of her blood-stained work clothes or even lock the door properly. They just clamped iron cuffs around her wrists and hauled her into the street like a criminal. The journey to the fortress took 3 hours by armored transport. Rhea spent the entire ride trying to figure out what the hell the king could possibly want with her. She wasn't important. She wasn't connected. She fixed broken creatures in a slum workshop and avoided attention like it was contagious. The fortress itself loomed over the capital like a threat made of stone and fire. Massive walls carved from volcanic rock, towers that scraped the sky, and everywhere the heat, oppressive, inescapable, radiating from the molten channels that ran beneath the entire structure. This was a place built for dragons, not humans, a place where magic saturated the air so thick it made Ria's teeth ache. They dragged her through corridors lined with enchanted torches and tapestries depicting battle scenes that were probably meant to be inspiring but just looked violent. Courtiers in silk robes watched her pass with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Ria kept her head up. She'd be damned if she gave them the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. The throne room was exactly as brutal as she'd imagined. Carved from a single massive chamber deep inside the mountain, the ceiling vaulted so high it disappeared into shadow. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting the light from channels of flowing lava that ran along the walls. And at the far end, seated on a throne made of fused bone and blackened steel, was the king. Draxenvire looked like violence given form. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of molten gold. He wore minimal armor, just enough to suggest he didn't need more, and radiated the kind of presence that made the air feel heavier. Scars marked his forearms and neck, pale lines against bronze skin. This was a man who had killed more people than Ria had ever met. The guard shoved her forward. She stumbled but caught herself before she hit the floor. "Kneel!" the scarred guard barked. Ria looked at the king, then at the guard, then back at the king. She didn't kneel. A ripple of shock went through the assembled courtiers. Someone gasped. The guard's hand went to his sword, but Draxen raised one hand and everyone froze. "Leave us," he said. His voice was low, controlled, but it carried like thunder. The guards hesitated. "Your Majesty, out." They obeyed. The courtiers followed, filing out through the side doors until the massive chamber was empty, except for Raya and the king. The silence was louder than the crowd had been. Draxen studied her for a long moment. "You don't kneel." "I don't work for you, Riti," Ria said. "So no." Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe, or irritation. Hard to tell. "You're the bone mechanic from the Ashmark slums." "If you already know who I am, why the interrogation?" "I want to see if the reports were accurate." He shifted in his throne, and Ria saw it, just for a second, a tightness around his eyes, a barely perceptible hesitation in the movement. Pain. He was in pain. Her brain kicked into gear automatically, cataloging details. The way he held his shoulders, the slight stiffness in his lower back, the fact that he was sitting instead of standing to greet a prisoner. "You have a spinal injury," she said. The amusement vanished from his face. "Careful. Chronic. Old. Probably decades. Maybe longer. The court healers have been throwing magic at it, but it's not responding because magic can't fix mechanical damage." Ria tilted her head, still analyzing. "You've got calcification along the vertebrae, probably from repeated dragon form transformations putting stress on an unhealed fracture. The pain gets worse when you shift, doesn't it?" Draxen's expression went very, very still. "How? Because I know what I'm looking at." Ria crossed her arms, chains clinking. "Your healers are idiots. They're treating a structural problem with energy-based solutions. It's like trying to fix a broken axle by painting the cart." For a moment, she thought he might actually kill her. The temperature in the room seemed to spike, heat rolling off him in waves. But then he laughed, short, sharp, and entirely humorless. 3 centuries, he said. 3 centuries of the best healers, the most powerful sorcerers, every expert in the 7 kingdoms. And you diagnose it in 30 seconds. "It's not complicated," Ria said. "It's just anatomy. And you can fix it." It wasn't a question. Ria hesitated, because this was the part where things got dangerous. "Maybe. I'd need to examine you properly, and I don't work under threat. You're a prisoner. Then you'll get prisoner-quality results." She met his eyes, refusing to back down. "You want me to fix 3 centuries of damage? I need cooperation, not chains." The silence stretched. Ria's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression flat. This was a gamble. A stupid, reckless gamble. But she'd learned a long time ago that showing fear in a negotiation was the fastest way to lose. Finally, Draxion stood. The movement was controlled, but she caught the flash of pain that crossed his face. He descended from the throne, each step measured, until he was standing directly in front of her. Up close, he was even more intimidating, easily a foot taller, radiating heat and power. "You have courage," he said quietly, "or you're suicidal. I haven't decided which." "Does it matter?" "Not particularly." He reached out and Ria tensed, but he just unlocked her chains. They fell to the floor with a heavy clatter. "You'll stay in the fortress, you'll examine me, and if you can fix what 3 centuries of magic failed to heal, I'll give you anything you want." "And if I can't?" His smile was sharp. "Then I'll assume you wasted my time and deal with you accordingly." Not exactly reassuring, but Ria nodded. "I'll need access to your medical records, all of them. And I'll need to see you transform." That got a reaction. Several courtiers who had been lingering near the side doors actually gasped. One of them, an elderly man in elaborate robes, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, this is highly irregular. Allowing a commoner to witness—" "I didn't ask for your opinion, Torvin." Draxion didn't even look at him. His eyes stayed locked on Ria. "You want to see my dragon form? I need to see the full extent of the damage. Your human form is just part of the picture. No one sees my dragon form unless they're about to die by it. Then I guess we're breaking tradition today." Ria shrugged. "Your choice. Stay in pain for another 3 centuries, or let me do my job." The elderly courtier, Torvin, looked like he might have a stroke. "This is outrageous. She has no respect for protocol, no understanding of—" "Torvin!" Draxion's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Leave! Now!" The old man fled. Draxion turned back to Ria. "You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. You're a shapeshifter with a mechanical injury that gets worse every time you transform. The only way to fix it permanently is to address the damage in both forms. Which means I need to see both forms." "It's not about secrecy." His jaw tightened. "The transformation is painful because of the injury. I've seen pain before. Not like this." Ria held his gaze. "Then I guess you'll just have to trust me." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The throne room felt too hot, too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then Draxion nodded once, sharp and final. "Tomorrow," he said. "Dawn, the eastern courtyard, come alone. I don't take orders." "Consider it a professional request." Ria smiled despite herself. "Fine. Professional request accepted." He turned away, walking back toward his throne with that same careful, controlled movement. She watched him go, her mind already racing through possibilities, treatment plans, risks. This was insane. She was about to attempt a procedure that no one had ever successfully completed, on the most dangerous man in the kingdom, with her life hanging in the balance. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt a spark of something that might have been excitement. A guard appeared at her elbow, a different one this time, younger, less hostile. "I'll show you to your quarters." Ria followed him through the winding corridors, barely paying attention to the route. Her thoughts were already consumed by the problem ahead. Spinal calcification, dragon transformation, centuries of accumulated damage. It would take precision, timing, and a level of risk that most sane people would never accept. Good thing she'd never been particularly sane. The quarters they gave her were nicer than anywhere she'd ever lived. A real bed, a private washroom, windows that actually opened. She ignored all of it and spent the next 6 hours going through the medical records they'd delivered. Thick leather-bound books filled with healing reports, diagnostic notes, and failed treatment attempts dating back over 200 years. Every healer had tried the same thing. Pour magic into the injury, force the bones to regenerate, suppress the pain with enchantments. Not one of them had addressed the root cause, the mechanical stress of transformation on a compromised structure. Idiots. All of them. By the time dawn broke, Ria had a plan. It was dangerous, unconventional, and required the king to endure a level of pain that would probably make him want to kill her. But it would work. It had to work. She found the eastern courtyard exactly where the guard said it would be. A massive open space surrounded by high walls, the ground scorched black from years of fire and combat. Drexian was already there, standing in the center, wearing nothing but loose pants and that same controlled expression. "You came," he said. "I said I would. Most people don't keep their word when dealing with kings. I'm not most people." Rhea set down her bag of tools, scalpels, clamps, wire, and several items she'd requisitioned from the fortress smithy overnight. "Are you ready?" "Are you?" I asked first. He actually smiled at that. Then the smile faded, replaced by something harder. "The transformation is going to hurt, more than usual. The injury makes it difficult." "I understand. You don't." He rolled his shoulders and Rhea saw the tension in every line of his body. "But you will." The air around him began to shimmer. Heat rolled off his skin in visible waves, and Rhea stepped back instinctively. Magic, raw, primal, and absolutely overwhelming, flooded the courtyard. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and then Draxian began to change. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't smooth. It was violent and brutal and looked like it was tearing him apart from the inside. His bones shifted, cracking audibly. His skin rippled and split, revealing scales beneath. His spine arched, and Rhea heard him make a sound that was halfway between a roar and a scream. The transformation took less than a minute. When it was done, a dragon stood where the king had been. He was massive, easily 40 feet from nose to tail, with scales the color of polished obsidian and gold eyes that burned like forge fire. Wings spread wide enough to cast shadows across the entire courtyard. Claws carved furrows in the scorched ground. Every inch of him radiated power and barely contained violence, and along his spine, Rhea could see it. The injury. Calcified tissue wrapped around the vertebrae like stone, restricting movement, causing visible distortion in the natural curve of his back. "Holy shit," she breathed. The dragon's head swung toward her, and for a second she thought he might incinerate her on the spot. But he just lowered himself to the ground, trembling with effort. Rhea approached slowly, hands raised. "I'm going to touch you now. Don't eat me." A low rumble that might have been laughter echoed from his chest. She placed her hands on his scales, feeling the heat radiating through them. Up close, the damage was even worse than she'd thought. The calcification had fused entire sections of vertebrae together, creating a rigid structure that fought against every movement. No wonder the transformation hurt. His body was trying to shift into a shape his spine couldn't support. "This is going to be bad," Rhea said quietly. "I need to break the calcification manually. It's going to hurt worse than anything you've felt in a long time. But if I don't do it, you'll never heal properly." The dragon made a sound that might have been agreement. Rhea took a breath, steadying herself. Then she climbed. Scaling a dragon's back while it was conscious was probably the stupidest thing she'd ever done. But she needed height, needed leverage, needed to reach the worst of the damage. She hauled herself up using the ridge of his scales, moving carefully until she was positioned directly over the calcified section. "On 3, she called down. 1. She didn't wait for 3. Rhea brought her full weight down on the calcified mass, driving her elbow into the weakest point with everything she had. The sound of it breaking was like stone shattering. The dragon roared, a sound so loud and so filled with pain that Rhea's ears rang. The entire fortress probably heard it. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She worked fast, using tools to pry away the broken pieces of calcification, clearing the damaged tissue, exposing the vertebrae beneath. Blood, dragon blood, thick and dark, ran hot over her hands. The dragon thrashed once, nearly throwing her off, but she held on, kept working, because stopping now would mean failure. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the last piece came free. Rhea slid down from his back, landing hard on the scorched ground. Her arms were shaking, her hands were covered in blood. But the calcification was gone. The dragon lay still, breathing hard, his entire body trembling. Then slowly, he began to move. His spine flexed, really flexed, the way it was supposed to, and Rhea saw the exact moment he realized the pain was gone. The look in his eyes was something between shock and rage and relief. He transformed back. This time, it was fast, smooth, almost easy. And when Draxion stood before her in human form again, there were tears on his face. "It's gone," he said, his voice rough. 3 centuries, and it's just gone. Rhea wiped the blood off her hands and tried not to collapse. "Told you I knew what I was doing." He crossed the courtyard in 3 strides and grabbed her by the shoulders. For a second, she thought he might actually kiss her. Instead, he just stared at her like she'd rewritten the laws of reality. "What do you want?" he asked. "Anything. Name it." Rhea opened her mouth to answer, and that's when the alarm bells started ringing. The fortress shook. Somewhere in the distance, an explosion echoed across the volcanic peaks. Draxion's head snapped toward the sound, his expression shifting from relief to fury in an instant. "We're under attack." The second explosion was closer, close enough that Rhea felt the shockwave through the stones beneath her feet. Draxion's entire body went rigid, his eyes blazing gold as he scanned the fortress walls. "Frost dragons," he said, the words coming out like a curse. "Northern warlord, Kael Frostborn." Rhea's blood went cold. Even in the slums, people knew that name. Kael Frostborn had been carving a path of destruction through the northern territories for months, leaving frozen wastelands where kingdoms used to stand. Rumor said he commanded an army of ice dragons and had never lost a battle. "How many?" she asked. "Enough." Draxion was already moving toward the courtyard entrance, his stride powerful and unrestricted in a way it hadn't been minutes ago. "Get to the interior chambers. Stay away from the outer walls." "Like hell." Rhea grabbed her bag of tools. "You just had major spinal surgery. You need observation for at least, I need to defend my kingdom. And if you re-injure yourself transforming too soon, you'll be useless." She planted herself in front of him. "I didn't just fix 3 centuries of damage so you could wreck it again in the first 5 minutes. His expression went dangerous. "Move. Make me." For a second she thought he actually would. His hand twitched toward her, heat rolling off his skin. But then another explosion rocked the fortress, this one accompanied by screams, and his focus shifted. "Fine. Come. But stay behind me and don't do anything stupid. That's rich coming from someone about to fight a war with a fresh spinal repair." They ran. The fortress had transformed into chaos. Soldiers sprinted through corridors in full combat gear. Healers rushed toward the outer walls carrying supplies. Somewhere above them, the sound of dragon roars echoed through stone, massive, inhuman sounds that made Rhea's bones vibrate. Draxion led her to the main battlements. The view from the top stole what little breath she had left. The sky was full of dragons, not just 1 or 2, dozens. Massive creatures with scales like glacial ice breathing frost instead of fire. They circled the fortress in formation, their movements coordinated and lethal. And leading them was the largest dragon Rhea had ever seen, easily twice Draxion's size, with wings that seemed to blot out the sun and eyes like frozen sapphires. Kael Frostborn. "He's here for you," Rhea said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "He heard you were injured, vulnerable. Everyone hears everything eventually." Draxion's jaw was tight. He's been waiting for an opening, thought today was his chance. Below them, Draxion's forces were mobilizing. Fire dragons launched from the lower courtyards, meeting the frost dragons in aerial combat that lit up the sky with competing elements. Ice and flame collided in explosions of steam. The sound was deafening. "Your Majesty!" A commander appeared at Draxion's side, a scarred woman with gray hair and armor that had seen serious use. "East wall is breached. They're trying to force entry through the lower gates. Send the 2nd Battalion, hold them at the choke points." Draxion's voice was pure command. "Where's Torvin?" "Coordinating the defensive wards with the court mages. Tell him to reinforce the throne room. If they get inside, that's where they'll go." The commander saluted and vanished. Draxion turned to Rhea. "Last chance, get to safety." What part of "I need to observe you" was unclear. "This isn't a medical procedure. It's a war." "Then I guess I'm about to get combat experience." Rhea crossed her arms. "You transform, I watch. That was the deal. I never agreed to—" The massive frost dragon, Kale, dove. He came down like a meteor, ice coating his claws, his jaws open in a roar that shook the entire fortress. Dreschen barely had time to shove Rhea aside before the impact hit. Stone exploded. The battlement they'd been standing on simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater of frozen rubble. Rhea hit the ground hard, her shoulder screaming in protest. She rolled, came up coughing, and saw Dreschen already transforming. The shift happened in seconds. Smooth, fast, none of the agonizing struggle from before. His dragon form erupted from his human body like a weapon being drawn, all black scales and golden fire. He met Kyle in midair. The collision was catastrophic. Two massive dragons locked together, claws tearing, jaws snapping, their combined weight crashing through the fortress walls like they were paper. Fire and ice exploded in all directions. Rhea scrambled backward, trying to get clear of the falling debris, her eyes locked on Dressen's spine. It held. The repair held. He moved like he hadn't moved in centuries, fluid, powerful, unrestricted. His spine flexed properly as he twisted, dodging Kyle's frost breath and retaliating with a gout of flame that turned stone to slag. For the first time in 300 years, Dreschen was fighting at full strength. And he was magnificent, but Kyle was bigger, stronger, and he had backup. 3 more frost dragons descended on Dreschen from above, coordinating their attack with brutal efficiency. Dreschen fought back hard, but he was outnumbered. One of Kyle's claws caught him across the ribs, tearing through scales and drawing blood that steamed in the cold air. Rhea's hands clenched into fists. She was useless here, completely, utterly useless. She couldn't fight, couldn't use magic, couldn't do anything except watch the dragon she'd just repaired get torn apart. Then she saw it. One of the frost dragons, smaller than the others, younger, had landed on the opposite battlement. It was injured, favoring its left wing, breathing hard, and it was positioned directly above a support column that held up an entire section of the fortress wall. An idea formed. Stupid, reckless, probably suicidal. Rhea ran. She sprinted across the broken battlement, dodging falling stones and frozen blast marks, her bag of tools bouncing against her hip. The frost dragon saw her coming and reared back, preparing to breathe ice that would freeze her solid. Rhea dropped into a slide, passing directly under its throat, and jammed her largest scalpel into the soft tissue between its scales. The dragon shrieked. Not a roar, a shriek of genuine pain. It reared up, wings flaring, and Rhea used the momentum to vault onto its back. She climbed fast, using the same technique she'd used on Dreschen, hauling herself up the ridge of scales until she reached the junction where the wing connected to the shoulder. "Rhea!" Dressen's voice, human words shaped by a dragon's throat, roared across the battlefield. "What the hell are you, She found the nerve cluster. Every flying creature had one, the bundle of nerves that controlled wing movement. She'd studied the anatomy in a book once, years ago, never thinking she'd actually use it. Rhea drove her scalpel in hard. The dragon's left wing went limp instantly. It crashed sideways, its massive weight slamming into the support column with enough force to crack stone. The column buckled. The wall section above it began to collapse. Rhea jumped. She hit the ground rolling, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Behind her, tons of stone and ice came down, crushing the injured frost dragon and creating a barrier that blocked 2 more from entering the fortress. "You insane!" Dreschen was suddenly beside her in human form, grabbing her arm and hauling her to her feet. Blood ran down his side from the wounds Kyle had inflicted, but his eyes were blazing. "You could have died!" "But I didn't," Rhea coughed, tasting dust. "And now they're down 1 dragon, and their entry point is blocked. That doesn't—" Kale's roar split the air. The massive frost dragon descended again, landing in the courtyard with enough force to crack the stone. His eyes fixed on Rhea with intelligent, furious recognition. "The healer," Kyle said, his voice like grinding ice. "The one who fixed you." Dreschen moved instantly, putting himself between Rhea and the Frost Warlord. "You want her? You go through me." Gladly. Kale's jaws spread in something that might have been a smile. "I came here expecting to fight a cripple. This is much better." They clashed again, but this time Rhea could see the difference. Dreschen wasn't just defending anymore. He was attacking, using the full range of motion in his spine to twist and strike from angles that had been impossible before. He was faster, more aggressive, more dangerous. But Kael was still bigger. The Frost Warlord's tail whipped around, catching Draxion across the back. The impact was brutal, exactly where the repair had been. Draxion's roar turned into something that sounded dangerously close to a scream. He crashed into the courtyard stones, his dragon form flickering. No! Rhea was moving before she'd consciously decided to. She sprinted across the courtyard, her mind already racing through the possibilities. The repair could hold. It should hold. But a direct impact like that, this soon after the procedure, Draxion transformed back to human, collapsing to his knees. Blood ran down his back from where Kael's tail had struck. His face was pale, twisted with pain. Kael advanced slowly, savoring the moment. 3 centuries of weakness, and you thought one healer could fix it? Pathetic. The repair is fine, Rhea said, dropping to her knees beside Draxion. Her hands moved over his back, checking for damage. It's bruising, impact trauma, not structural failure. Rhea! Draxion's voice was strained. Run! Absolutely not. She dug through her bag, pulling out a vial of concentrated stimulant she'd brought for emergencies. Drink this. That won't. It's a neural accelerant. It'll override the pain signals for about 10 minutes. She shoved the vial at him. Drink it, transform, and finish this before your body realizes how much it hurts. Kael laughed, the sound echoing across the ruined courtyard. The mechanic thinks she can drug him into winning. How quaint. Draxion looked at Rhea, then at the vial, then back at Kael. He drank. The effect was immediate. His pupils dilated. His breathing evened out. The tension in his shoulders released, replaced by something harder, sharper. He stood, and this time there was no hesitation in the movement. 10 minutes, Rhea said quietly. Make them count. Draxion transformed. The shift was pure violence. His dragon form erupted with twice the speed as before, fueled by the accelerant flooding his system. He hit Kael before the Frost Warlord could react, claws tearing into ice-scaled hide, jaws locking around Kael's throat. The battle that followed was the most brutal thing Rhea had ever witnessed. No strategy, no elegance, just raw, primal fury unleashed without restraint. Draxion fought like something unchained, using every bit of mobility the repair had given him, every ounce of power he'd been forced to suppress for 3 centuries. He was terrifying. Kael tried to match him, but he'd miscalculated. He'd come expecting a wounded opponent, not a dragon at full strength with absolutely nothing to lose. Within 5 minutes, Kael was bleeding from a dozen wounds. Within 7, he was retreating. Within 9, he was running. The Frost Warlord launched skyward, his remaining forces scattering in his wake. Draxion pursued for half a mile, driving them north until they disappeared beyond the mountain range. Only then did he return, landing in the courtyard with less grace than before. The stimulant was wearing off. Rhea saw the exact moment it happened. Draxion's dragon form wavered, and he transformed back to human mid-collapse. She caught him, or tried to. He was too heavy. They both went down in a heap of blood and exhausted breathing. You, Draxion gasped, are out of your mind. You won. I nearly died. But you didn't. Rhea checked his back again, her hand shaking from adrenaline. The repair was intact, bruised, stressed, but intact. The procedure held. You're fine. I'm not fine, He stopped, looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You just enabled me to fight at full power for the first time in 3 centuries. That was the point of fixing you, wasn't it? And you attacked a frost dragon with a scalpel. It seemed like a good idea at the time. He started laughing. It sounded half hysterical, edged with pain and relief, and something that might have been admiration. You're insane. I've been told. Soldiers were flooding the courtyard now, securing the area, tending to wounded. The scarred commander appeared again, looking relieved to see Draxion alive. Casualties, Sul? He asked. 17 dead, 34 wounded. East wall is severely damaged, but holding. She glanced at Rhea, her expression unreadable. The mechanics' intervention at the support column saved the lower battalion. They would have been overrun otherwise. Draxion looked at Rhea. You hear that? You saved a battalion. I dropped rocks on a dragon. Don't make it poetic. But the commander was already spreading the word. Within minutes, the entire fortress knew that the slum mechanic had taken down a frost dragon single-handedly. The story was growing with each retelling. By the time it reached the throne room, she'd apparently killed 3 dragons and held off half the army with nothing but a scalpel and attitude. Rhea wanted to correct them, wanted to explain that she'd just exploited basic anatomy and got lucky. But Draxian's hand on her shoulder stopped her. "Let them talk," he said quietly. "You earned it. I didn't. You kept me functional during a battle I should have lost. You turned a defensive fight into a victory." His expression was serious now, the amusement gone. "You didn't just heal me. You changed the entire outcome of this war." Rhea opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Because he was right. The repair had worked. Draxian had fought at full strength. And Kael Frostborn, the warlord who'd never lost a battle, had retreated. Holy shit. They'd actually won. The realization hit her like a physical thing, and she sat down hard on the blood-stained stones. Her hands were shaking. Her entire body was shaking. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her hollow and exhausted and vaguely nauseous. "I need to check your back again," she said, because focusing on work was easier than processing what had just happened. That impact could have caused microfractures even if the main repair held. "Later." Draxian pulled her to her feet. "Right now you need food and rest, in that order." "I'm fine. You're shaking so hard you can barely stand." "That's just—" She stopped. He was right. Again. Damn it. "Fine. Food. Then I check your back." "Deal." He led her through the fortress, which was still in controlled chaos. Soldiers saluted as they passed. Healers nodded with what looked like grudging respect. Even the courtiers who had sneered at her that morning now watched her with wary calculation. The shift in their expressions wasn't subtle. Where there had been contempt, now there was uncertainty. Where there had been dismissal, now there was calculation. Rhea could practically see the wheels turning in their heads, reassessing her value, her threat level, her potential usefulness. She hated it. They reached a private dining hall, smaller than the throne room but still elaborate. Draxian collapsed into a chair with less grace than usual, his face tight with pain now that the stimulant had fully worn off. "How bad?" Rhea asked, her professional instincts overriding exhaustion. "Like someone hit me with a battering ram made of ice." "So accurate, then." She moved behind him, her hands carefully probing the injury site. The bruising was extensive, the tissue swollen and hot. But underneath, the repair was solid. "You're going to be in pain for a few days." The impact stressed the surrounding tissue, but the structural work held. No breaks. No displacement. 3 centuries, he said again, softer this time. 3 centuries of being told it couldn't be fixed. And you did it in one morning. I told you, it wasn't complicated. It was to everyone else. He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "What do you want?" Rhea called her. "You fixed an impossible injury. You helped win an unwinnable battle. Name your price." She'd been thinking about this since he'd first made the offer. Freedom, money, a position in the court, all the things that would have made sense to ask for. Instead, she heard herself say, "I want access to your medical archives, all of them, and a workshop in the fortress where I can work." He blinked. "That's it?" "That's it. You could ask for wealth, power, land, anything." I don't want any of that." Rhea met his eyes. "I want to keep doing what I do, fixing what magic can't heal, and I can't do that effectively from a slum workshop with limited resources." For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then he smiled, genuine this time, not the sharp, dangerous thing from before. "You're either the most practical person I've ever met or the least ambitious. Can it be both?" Apparently. He stood, wincing slightly, and extended his hand. "Done. You'll have your archives and your workshop and anything else you need." Rhea shook his hand. His grip was warm, strong, and lingered just slightly longer than professionally necessary. "There is one condition," Draxian added. Of course there was. "Which is, you stay in the fortress, work here, because if Kael comes back, and he will, I'm going to need you functional and close. I don't take orders, remember? Consider it a professional request." He was using her words back at her, the bastard. You keep me functional. I keep you supplied. Mutual benefit. It made sense. Perfect sense. The fortress had resources she'd never have access to otherwise. Medical texts, rare materials, actual funding for her work. And if she was being honest with herself, the idea of returning to the slums felt wrong now, like putting on clothes that no longer fit. Fine, Rhea said. But I'm not joining your court. I'm not playing politics. I just work. Agreed. They shook again. And this time when he let go, Rhea felt the weight of what she'd just committed to. She'd bound herself to the most dangerous man in the kingdom, given up her independence, traded the familiar poverty of the slums for the unknown dangers of royal proximity. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt a flicker of something that might have been anticipation. The door burst open with enough force to crack against the stone wall. Torvin, the elderly courtier from that morning, stood in the doorway, his face purple with rage. Behind him stood 3 other courtiers, all wearing similar expressions of outrage. This is an outrage. Torvin's voice shook. Your Majesty, you cannot seriously be considering giving this commoner access to royal resources. Draxion's expression went cold. I wasn't aware I needed your permission, Torvin. She has no training, no credentials. She's a slum mechanic who got lucky with one procedure. Torvin gestured wildly at Rhea. And now you're rewarding her with archives that took centuries to compile? Giving her authority over medical decisions? It's madness. It's my decision. It's a mistake that will undermine the entire court. One of the other courtiers stepped forward, a thin man with calculating eyes. Your Majesty, we understand you're grateful, but gratitude shouldn't override tradition. The medical archives contain knowledge passed down through generations of trained healers. To give access to someone with no formal education just saved your ungrateful lives, Rhea cut in. While you were hiding in your reinforced chambers, I was on the battlements. Where were your trained healers when the king needed someone to keep him functional? You got lucky, Torvin spat. One successful procedure doesn't make you a master healer, and 3 centuries of failure doesn't make your healers competent. Rhea stood, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. You want to talk about credentials? Fine. Your court healers said the king's injury was incurable. I cured it. Your military strategist said Kael couldn't be beaten. He ran. Your defensive specialist said the lower battalion was lost. I saved them. What exactly have your credentials accomplished today? The silence was thick enough to choke on. Torvin's face went from purple to nearly white. You arrogant little... Enough! Draxion's voice cut through the room like a blade. The temperature spiked noticeably. Torvin, you've questioned my judgment for the last time. Your Majesty. 3 centuries. Draxion stood, and despite the obvious pain, his presence filled the room. 3 centuries you and your predecessors told me to accept my limitations, to rule from a throne because transforming was too painful, to rely on defensive strategies because I couldn't fight properly. And in one day, this woman proved every single one of you wrong. She's an outsider, the thin courtier said desperately. She doesn't understand our ways. Giving her this much influence? Influence? Draxion laughed, but there was no humor in it. She asked for a workshop and access to books. If that threatens your influence, maybe you should examine why you're here. Torvin drew himself up. I have served this court for 40 years. And in 40 years, what have you accomplished besides maintaining your own position? Draxion's eyes were blazing gold now. Rhea Calder has been here less than a day, and she's already contributed more to this kingdom's survival than you have in 4 decades. The words hit like physical blows. Torvin staggered back, his face contorting with rage and humiliation. This is not over, he said, his voice shaking. The court will not accept this. Tradition nearly got me killed. Draxion's voice dropped to something dangerous. Tradition told me magic could fix everything. Tradition said I should trust the experts. Tradition has been useless for 300 years. So if you want to stand on tradition, go ahead. But do it somewhere else. You're dismissed. Permanently. You can't. I can. And I am. Draxian gestured to the guards who had appeared in the doorway. Escort Torvin and his associates out of the fortress. They have until dawn to collect their belongings. After that, they're trespassing. Churvamas. The guards moved forward. Torvin opened his mouth to protest, saw the expression on Draxian's face, and apparently thought better of it. He turned and swept from the room, the other courtiers scrambling to follow. But before he left, he turned back to Rhea. The look in his eyes was pure poison. "This isn't finished," he said quietly. "You may have won today, but the court has a long memory, and you're making enemies faster than you can count them." "Good thing I'm not here to make friends," Rhea said. Torvin left. The silence that followed felt heavier than the confrontation. Rhea sat back down, suddenly aware of how much energy that had taken. Her hands were shaking again. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did." Draxian sat back down as well, pressing a hand to his back. "Torvin's been undermining me for years, using my injury as proof that I was weak, pushing for power he had no right to." He looked at her. "You just eliminated his primary argument, and he can't stand it." "He's not the only one who thinks I don't belong here." "Probably not." Draxian's expression was grim. "The court is built on tradition and hierarchy. You represent change, disruption. They'll resist that." "Maybe I should have asked for land and left." "Would you actually want that?" Rhea thought about it, going back to the slums, working in her cramped workshop, scraping by on what little she could charge. It had been her life for 8 years, but the thought of returning to it felt suffocating now. "No," she admitted, "I wouldn't." "Then you'll deal with the court, same as I do." He leaned back, closing his eyes. "They'll test you, try to undermine you, spread rumors. It's what they do when they can't control something. Sounds exhausting." "It is, but you're stubborn enough to handle it." "Bull." Food arrived, brought by servants who looked at Rhea with a mixture of curiosity and respect. She ate mechanically, too tired to taste anything, while Draxian outlined the fortress layout and which archives she'd have access to. "The medical wing is in the western tower," he said between bites. 3 floors. The bottom floor is current records and active cases. Second floor is historical texts and comparative anatomy. Third floor is restricted research, experimental procedures, failed treatments, dangerous techniques. "And I get access to all of it?" "All of it." He took a drink, wincing as the movement pulled at his back. "There's also a surgical suite on the ground floor that hasn't been used in years. The court healers prefer working in the main healing chambers where they can use ambient magic. You can convert it into your workshop." Rhea's mind was already racing. A full surgical suite, access to centuries of medical knowledge, resources she'd only dreamed about. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch. Just the agreement we already made. You stay. You work. You keep me functional if Kael comes back." "When he comes back," Rhea corrected. "He didn't strike me as the type to accept defeat." "He's not." Draxian's expression darkened. "He'll regroup, come back stronger, and next time he'll know what to expect." "Then we need to be ready." "We?" Rhea met his eyes. "You think I'm going to let someone wreck my work? I just spent hours fixing your spine. If Kael wants to break it again, he'll have to go through me first." Draxian stared at her for a long moment. Then he started laughing, real laughter this time, not the bitter sound from before. "What?" Rhea demanded. "Nothing, just, you really are insane." But he was smiling. "Most people would run from the threat of a frost warlord. You're planning to defend your surgical results. I take my work seriously. I noticed." They finished eating in comfortable silence. By the time the plates were cleared, the sun was setting. The fortress was quieter now. The immediate crisis passed, but the underlying tension remained. Soldiers still patrolled the walls. Healers still tended to the wounded. The damage from the battle was everywhere. Scorched stones, frozen blast marks, collapsed sections of wall. It would take weeks to repair. Maybe months. "Get some sleep," Draxian said, standing carefully. "Tomorrow, you can start setting up your workshop. I'll have the archives open for you." Rhea nodded, too exhausted to argue. But as she headed toward her quarters, escorted by a guard who kept a respectful distance, She caught sight of her reflection in a polished shield hanging on the wall. Blood, dirt, torn clothing, hair wild, eyes that looked older than they had that morning. She looked like someone who'd survived a war. She looked like someone who belonged in a fortress. And for the first time in her life, Rhea Calder didn't hate what she saw. The guard showed her to her quarters, the same rooms from the night before, but they felt different now. Less like a prison. More like, what? Not home. Not yet. But maybe the start of something. She collapsed onto the bed without bothering to clean up properly. Her body was screaming for rest, but her mind was still racing. The battle. The repair holding under stress. Torvin's threats. Draxian's trust. The fact that she'd just committed to staying in a place where half the court wanted her gone. She should be planning. Should be thinking through strategies for dealing with the political mess she'd just walked into. Should be worried about Kael's inevitable return. Instead, she fell asleep with her boots still on and her tools still in her bag, too exhausted to care about anything except the darkness pulling her under. And somewhere in the fortress, in chambers she'd never seen, Torvin was already planning his revenge. Torvin wasn't planning revenge in chambers Rhea had never seen. He was planning it in the council hall, surrounded by 24 courtiers who shared his fury, and he was planning it with the kind of cold precision that came from 40 years of political survival. "She's made him weak," Torvin said, his voice carrying across the vaulted chamber. "Can't you see it? He dismissed me, for a slum mechanic with grease under her nails." "He's always been impulsive," said Lady Cirith, a silver-haired woman who controlled most of the fortress's supply chains. "But this is different. He's given her access to the archives, the surgical wing. He's treating her like she has authority." "Because she does," said Lord Venn, the thin courtier who'd backed Torvin earlier. "He's infatuated, or worse, dependent. She fixed his spine, and now he thinks he needs her." "He doesn't need her," Torvin said flatly. "He's survived 3 centuries without her. He'll survive after she's gone." The words hung in the air. Several courtiers shifted uncomfortably. "You're not suggesting," Lady Cirith began. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts." Torvin's smile was thin and cold. "The girl is a liability. An outsider with no loyalty to this court, no understanding of our traditions, and far too much influence over our king. If something were to happen to her, an accident perhaps, it would be unfortunate. But it would also solve our problem. The king would know," Lord Venn said quietly. "He's not stupid. The king is distracted by gratitude and whatever else that girl has made him feel." Torvin leaned forward. "And when Kael Frostborn returns, and he will return, Draxian will have more important things to worry about than one dead mechanic." Silence. Then, slowly nods began to ripple through the chamber. "What did you have in mind?" Lady Cirith asked. Torvin's smile widened. 3 floors below, Rhea woke to someone pounding on her door. She jerked upright, still wearing yesterday's blood-stained clothes, her brain struggling to catch up with consciousness. "What?" she called out. "Workshop's ready." The voice was female, clipped. "King's orders. You coming or not?" Rhea stumbled to the door and opened it to find the scarred commander from yesterday, the one who'd reported casualties. Up close, she looked even more formidable. Gray hair pulled back tight, armor polished but marked with old damage, eyes that had seen too much death to be impressed by much. "Commander Kira," the woman said, not offering her hand. "I'm supposed to show you the surgical wing." "Now?" "Unless you've got something more important to do." Rhea grabbed her bag. "Lead the way." The fortress looked different in daylight, less imposing, more functional. Workers were already repairing battle damage, replacing broken stones, clearing debris, reinforcing weakened walls. Soldiers drilled in the courtyards. Life went on. The western tower was older than the main fortress, built from darker stone that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Kira led her through a side entrance and down a spiral staircase that opened into a long corridor lined with doors. "Bottom floor," Kira said, pushing open a heavy door at the end. "Hasn't been used in about 40 years. Court healers prefer their fancy chambers upstairs." The surgical suite was bigger than Rhea's entire workshop in the slums. High ceilings, stone walls, tables that could be raised or lowered, cabinets built into the walls. and in the center, a surgical platform with channels cut into the stone for drainage. It was perfect. Tools are in the cabinets, Kira continued. Most of it's old, but the king said to requisition whatever you need from the smithy or the healers. He also said you get priority on supplies. Priority over the court healers? His words, not mine. Kira's expression didn't change. You pissed off a lot of people yesterday. I noticed. Good. Means you're paying attention. Kira moved to the windows, narrow slits that looked out over the lower courtyard. Word of advice. Watch your back. The court doesn't forgive easily, and Torvin's got friends. You warning me or threatening me? Warning. I don't care about court politics. Kira turned to face her. But I care about the king, and right now you're the only reason he's functional, which means if something happens to you, we're all screwed when Kael comes back. So you're protecting your asset. I'm protecting my kingdom. Kira headed for the door. The archives are 2 floors up. Guard at the entrance will let you in. Don't steal anything. She left before Rhea could respond. Rhea spent the next 2 hours exploring the surgical suite, cataloging supplies, and trying not to think about how surreal this was. Yesterday, she'd been in the slums. Today, she had access to equipment most bone mechanics never saw in their entire careers. The cabinets held scalpels, clamps, saws, drills, all perfectly maintained despite decades of disuse. The drainage channels were ingeniously designed, sloping toward collection basins that could be emptied without contaminating the workspace. Whoever had built this understood anatomy and engineering equally well. She was testing the mobility of one of the surgical tables when the door opened again. Not Kira this time. A young man, maybe 20, wearing healer's robes that looked expensive. He had the kind of face that had probably never been punched, soft, clean, aristocratic. You're the mechanic, he said. Not a question. That's me. I'm Healer Taurine, head of the medical council. He looked around the suite with obvious disdain. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. And I see a slum worker playing with equipment she doesn't understand. He picked up one of the scalpels, examining it like it was a curiosity. These tools require training, years of study. You can't just... Rhea plucked the scalpel from his hand. This is a curved blade designed for working around bone. The angle is specifically calibrated to minimize damage to surrounding tissue. You hold it like this, she demonstrated, with pressure on the back of the blade, not the edge. Amateur mistake holding it the way you were. You'd tear tissue instead of cutting it. Torn's face flushed. I know how to hold a scalpel. Could have fooled me. Rhea set the blade down. Was there something you wanted, or are you just here to be condescending? I'm here to remind you that this facility was built by trained healers for trained healers. Whatever the king thinks you've accomplished, it doesn't give you the right to... To what? Use equipment that's been sitting here for 40 years collecting dust? Rhea crossed her arms. Your people couldn't fix the king's spine in 3 centuries, so either your training is worthless or you weren't actually trying. Which is it? We tried everything. You tried magic. You never tried actually understanding the problem. Rhea moved to one of the cabinets, pulling out a medical text. This is a spine. 33 vertebrae in humans, 42 in dragon form. When a dragon transforms, the spine has to elongate and reshape. If there's structural damage, calcification, fractures, misalignment, the transformation puts stress on the injury. That stress causes pain. Pain causes restricted movement. Restricted movement compounds the problem. It's a cycle. We know that. Then why didn't you fix it? Rhea slammed the book down on the table. The repair wasn't complicated. Break the calcification, clear the damaged tissue, let the body heal properly. But none of you tried that because it's not magical. It's mechanical, and you people think magic solves everything. Torn's face had gone from flushed to pale. You don't understand the politics involved. The king's injury was sensitive. Attempting a procedure that could fail would have been doing your job. Rhea turned away from him. Get out. I've got work to do. This isn't over. Yeah, I've heard that before. Doors behind you. He left, radiating wounded dignity. Rhea waited until his footsteps faded, then let out a breath. That was the second enemy she'd made in less than 24 hours. At this rate, she'd have the entire court plotting against her by the end of the week. She headed up to the archives. The guard at the entrance was young, nervous, and clearly unsure whether he was supposed to let her in. Rhea showed him the token Draxion had sent to her quarters that morning, a black iron coin stamped with the royal seal. The guard studied it, studied her, then opened the door. The archives were everything Rhea had dreamed of. Shelves stretching 20 feet high, filled with books, scrolls, bound journals, the smell of old paper and leather, centuries of accumulated knowledge. She started with comparative anatomy, pulling texts on dragon physiology, skeletal structure, nerve systems. She needed to understand not just what she'd fixed, but what could go wrong. Kale's attack had proven the repair could hold under stress, but there were other variables. Infection, scar tissue formation, long-term complications from rapid healing. She was deep into a text on post-surgical recovery when she heard footsteps. Draxion emerged from between the shelves, moving easier than yesterday but still careful. He wore simple clothes, no armor, no crown, nothing that screamed royalty. "You found it," he said. "Hard to miss." Rhea gestured at the surrounding books. "This is incredible. Most of it hasn't been touched in decades. The court healers prefer their own methods." He picked up one of the books she'd pulled. "Finding anything useful?" "Maybe. There's a section on accelerated tissue regeneration that might explain why your repair is healing faster than normal." She pointed to a passage. "Dragons have latent regenerative properties that magic normally enhances, but if the magic was interfering with the mechanical repair, removing it might have actually allowed your natural healing to work properly." Draxion read the passage, his expression thoughtful. "So by not using magic, you let my body fix itself." Essentially. Rhea pulled another book. "There's also information here on combat stress and skeletal integrity. If we're expecting Kael to come back, I need to understand what kind of damage your spine can take before it fails. You're planning for the next battle. Someone should." She looked at him. "How's the pain?" "Manageable. The bruising is worse than I expected, but the structure feels solid." "Let me check." He turned without argument, lifting his shirt. The bruising had spread since yesterday, deep purple marks across his lower back. But when Rhea pressed carefully along the spine, the vertebrae were stable. No grinding, no shifting. "It's holding," she said. "But you need rest. Real rest. Not just between battles. Rest isn't an option. Kael will be back within the week." "How do you know?" "Because that's what I do." Draxion pulled his shirt back down. He retreated to minimize losses, but he knows I'm vulnerable right after the repair. If he waits too long, I'll be fully healed. His best chance is to hit again before that happens. Then we need to prepare. "We?" Rhea met his eyes. "I told you, I'm not letting anyone wreck my work." He smiled, but it faded quickly. "There's something else. I've had reports from my informants in the court. Torvin's been meeting with other courtiers, planning something. Let me guess. Get rid of the mechanic, restore the old order. Something like that." Draxion's expression darkened. "I can't protect you from the entire court, Rhea. If they decide you're a threat, I am a threat. To their power structure, anyway." Rhea closed the book she'd been reading. "But I didn't come here to play politics. I came here to work. They can hate me all they want as long as they stay out of my way. It's not that simple. It never is." They were interrupted by the sound of alarm bells. Again, Draxion's head snapped toward the window. "That's the Southern Watch." They ran. The southern battlement was chaos. Soldiers scrambling to positions, commanders shouting orders. And on the horizon, approaching fast, frost dragons, at least 20 of them. "He's early," Draxion said, his voice tight. "Or you underestimated how angry you made him." Rhea scanned the approaching force. "That's more than last time. Double." Draxion was already moving toward the transformation courtyard. "He's not here to test us. He's here to finish it." Kira appeared at their side. "South wall is reinforced, but we don't have enough aerial forces to match those numbers. We'll be overwhelmed in minutes." "Pull back to defensive positions," Draxion ordered. "Fortify the inner courtyards. Make them fight for every inch." That's a siege strategy, Kira said. We'll be trapped. We're already trapped. At least this way we control the terrain. Draxion looked at Rhea. Get to the interior chambers, now. Not happening. Rhea, we already had this argument. You need observation. I'm staying. His jaw tightened, but there was no time to debate. The frost dragons were already diving. The assault was different this time. More coordinated, more brutal. Kyle wasn't leading the charge. He was directing it from above, sending wave after wave of frost dragons against specific weak points in the fortress defenses. Draxion transformed and launched to meet them. But even at full strength, he was outnumbered 10-1. Within minutes, he was bleeding from multiple wounds. The courtyard where Rhea had performed the repair was taking heavy fire, the stones cracking under repeated impacts. And then Kyle descended. He didn't bother with the aerial combat this time. He came straight for the fortress heart, smashing through the outer wall like it was paper. Stone exploded. The shockwave knocked Rhea off her feet. Kyle's massive form filled the courtyard, ice radiating from his scales. His eyes locked on Draxion. I told you I'd be back, Kyle said, his voice grinding ice and ancient malice. This time, I'm not leaving until you're dead. Draxion met him head-on. The collision shook the fortress foundations. Fire and ice erupted in a blast that turned the courtyard into a war zone. Rhea scrambled back, her mind racing. This wasn't like the first battle. Kale wasn't underestimating them anymore. He'd brought overwhelming force. And even with Draxion at full strength, the numbers were impossible. They were going to lose. Then she saw it. A weakness. Not in Kyle, in the fortress itself. The repeated impacts from the frost dragons were creating stress fractures in the support structure. One more major hit and entire sections would collapse. An idea formed. Insane, probably suicidal, but possibly their only chance. Rhea ran toward the nearest soldier. I need cables, heavy ones, and a team to help me rig them. The soldier stared at her like she was crazy. What? Cables, now, or we all die. Something in her voice must have convinced him. He sprinted toward the supply depot. Rhea turned back to the battle, her eyes mapping the courtyard layout, the stress fractures, the support columns, the pattern of Kyle's attacks. It could work. It had to work. The soldier returned with 3 others, carrying coils of heavy cable used for moving construction materials. Rhea grabbed one end. There. She pointed to a support column on the east side. Wrap it around the base. Tight. That'll bring down the whole section. That's the point. Move. They moved, wrapping cable around the column while Rhea ran to the opposite side, paying out line. The battle raged overhead. Draxion was tiring, his movements slower, blood streaming from a dozen wounds. Kyle was pressing the advantage, forcing him back toward the exact position Rhea needed. She tied off her end of the cable to another support column, creating a tripwire across the courtyard at chest height for a dragon. Then she did it again and again. 3 cables, strategically placed, each one attached to a compromised support structure. Get clear, she shouted to the soldiers. They didn't need to be told twice. Now she just needed to get Kyle in position. Draxion, she screamed across the battlefield. Fall back, lead him east. Draxion's dragon head turned toward her. For a second, she thought he'd ignore her. Then he dove, angling toward the eastern side of the courtyard. Kale pursued, savage and relentless. The massive frost dragon hit the first cable at full speed. The cable snapped taut. The support column it was attached to cracked. Not enough to bring it down, but enough to stress it further. Kale barely noticed. He was focused on Draxion, on finishing this. He hit the second cable. This one caught him across the chest, the impact driving him downward. The support column groaned, cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. One more. Again, Vit, Rhea shouted. Draw him through. Draxion was bleeding badly now, his movements desperate. But he turned, diving through the gauntlet one more time. Kale followed, roaring triumph. He hit the third cable. The support column didn't just crack, it shattered. And because Rhea had chosen that specific column, the one bearing the weight of 3 compromised sections, the entire eastern wall began to collapse. Tons of stone came down on Kyle. The Frost Warlord roared, but he was trapped, buried under rubble, his wings pinned, his massive body crushed beneath the fortress he'd tried to destroy. The collapse didn't stop. It spread. taking down the sections Rhea had calculated. Dust filled the air. The sound was deafening. When it cleared, Kyle was buried. Not dead. Dragons were too tough for that, but immobilized, trapped under thousands of pounds of stone. His remaining forces saw their leader fall and scattered. Within minutes, the sky was clear. Victory. Except Draxion was falling. He'd taken too much damage. The collapse had caught him at the edge, and now he was plummeting from the sky, his dragon form failing, transforming midair back to human. Rhea ran. She had no plan, no strategy, just the desperate knowledge that if he hit the ground at that speed in human form, his spine would shatter and every bit of work she'd done would be worthless. He crashed in the rubble 20 feet from where she was running. The impact was sickening. Rhea reached him seconds later. He was unconscious, bleeding from everywhere, his back twisted at an angle that made her stomach turn. No, no, no! Her hands moved over his spine. The repair was compromised, not broken, but the impact had displaced 2 vertebrae. If they healed like this, he'd be worse off than before the surgery. She needed to reset them, now, before the swelling made it impossible. I need help, she screamed. Soldiers appeared. Hold him. Don't let him move. He needs a healer. I am the healer. Hold him. They obeyed, pinning Draxion's shoulders and hips. Rhea positioned her hands on either side of the displaced vertebrae. This was going to hurt him, badly, but there was no other option. She pushed. The vertebrae shifted back into alignment with a sound that would haunt her nightmares. Draxion's eyes snapped open and he screamed, a sound of pure agony. Hold him! Rhea shouted, maintaining pressure. Don't let him move! The soldiers bore down. Draxion thrashed once, his strength terrifying even injured. Then the displacement locked back into proper alignment. He collapsed, unconscious again. Rhea's hands were shaking so hard she could barely function. But she forced herself to check. The vertebrae were aligned, the repair was intact. He'd heal. Get him to the surgical suite, she said, her voice rough. Carefully. If you jar his spine, I'll kill you myself. They moved him on a stretcher, taking 20 minutes to navigate the rubble-strewn corridors. Rhea followed, her mind numb with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. The surgical suite had survived intact. Rhea directed them to lay Draxion on the central table, then sent everyone away except Kira. I need you to watch him, Rhea said. If he wakes up, if he tries to move, stop him. His spine needs to stabilize. How long? At least 12 hours, maybe more. Rhea grabbed supplies from the cabinets. I need to close these wounds before he loses more blood. She worked for 6 hours straight, stitching, cleaning, bandaging. Her hands moved on autopilot while her brain cataloged everything that had gone wrong and everything that had somehow gone right. They'd won. Again. Against impossible odds. And Rhea had just saved Draxion's life by resetting his spine in the middle of a rubble field with no anesthetic and soldiers for assistance. The absurdity of it hit her around hour 4, and she started laughing. Couldn't stop. Laughed until tears ran down her face, and Kira was looking at her with genuine concern. You all right? Kira asked. I collapsed a building on a dragon warlord and then performed emergency spinal surgery in a war zone. Rhea wiped her eyes. No, I'm not all right. I'm insane. You saved the fortress. I got lucky. Luck doesn't account for those cable placements. You calculated that. Kira's expression was something close to respect. The court's going to lose their minds when they find out what you did. They already hate me. What's a little more? This isn't just hate. You've proven you're dangerous. Kira leaned against the wall. They can't dismiss you anymore. Can't pretend you're just a lucky mechanic. You just defeated a warlord using engineering and anatomy. I used falling rocks. You used your brain. In a court full of people who rely on magic and tradition, that makes you the most dangerous person here. Kira paused. Well, second most dangerous. First would be him. She gestured at Draxion, but he's unconscious. Rhea finished the last bandage. Draxion was stable, breathing steady. The wounds were clean. His spine was aligned. He'd live. She sat down hard on the floor, too exhausted to care about dignity. What happens now? She asked. Now? Kira considered. Now Torvin and his people realize you're not going away, and they'll stop playing political games and start playing for keeps. Meaning watch your back, because someone's going to try to kill you, and they won't be subtle about it. The words hung in the air like a threat. Rhea looked at Draxion's unconscious form, at the surgical suite she'd been given, at the blood on her hands from saving a king's life. She'd walked into this fortress 2 days ago as a prisoner. Now she was a target. And the most dangerous thing was, she didn't want to leave. Somewhere in the fortress, Torvin was receiving reports of the battle, of Kael's defeat, of Rhea's impossible victory. And he was making a decision that would change everything. Torvin's decision was simple. If the mechanic wouldn't leave voluntarily, and if the king was too besotted to see reason, then the solution was equally simple. She had to die, and it had to look like an accident. The poison arrived 2 hours after Kael's defeat, delivered by a servant who owed Torvin money and silence in equal measure. A clear liquid in a small vial, tasteless when mixed with wine, lethal within minutes. The servant's instructions were specific: add it to the mechanic's evening meal. She'd be dead before morning, and by the time anyone investigated, the servant would be 3 towns away with enough silver to start over. But the servant made one critical mistake. She didn't account for the fact that Rhea Calder hadn't left the surgical suite in 14 hours. Rhea was still on the floor when Draxion woke up. She'd meant to rest for just a few minutes, but exhaustion had dragged her under. She came awake to the sound of movement on the surgical table, her hand instinctively reaching for a scalpel before her brain caught up. Draxion was trying to sit up. "Don't move," Rhea snapped, scrambling to her feet. Her entire body protested, every muscle stiff, her shoulders screaming from where she'd hit the ground during the collapse. She didn't care. "You need to stay flat for at least another 6 hours." "How long was I out?" His voice was rough, strained. 14 hours. Rhea checked his pupils. Slightly dilated, but responsive. "Your spine is aligned, but the tissue is still healing. If you move wrong now, you'll undo everything." "Kael?" "Buried under half the eastern wall, alive but not going anywhere." She placed her hands on his shoulders, gentle but firm. "Lie down, now." For a moment she thought he'd argue, then he sank back against the table, wincing. The fortress? Still standing, barely. Rhea moved to check his back. The bandages were clean, no bleeding through. "Kira's coordinating repairs. Your forces scattered Kael's army. We won. You won." Draxion turned his head to look at her. "The cables. The collapse. That was you." That was desperation and basic engineering. That was brilliant. His hand caught hers before she could pull away. "You saved my life. Again." Rhea didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to process the way he was looking at her, like she'd done something impossible instead of just improvising under pressure. "You would have done the same," she said finally. "I wouldn't have thought of it." "Then you're not as smart as you think you are." She pulled her hand free, deflecting with sarcasm because anything else felt too dangerous. "How's the pain?" "Bad, but manageable." Liar. She grabbed a vial from the cabinet, a mild painkiller that wouldn't interfere with healing. "Drink this." He obeyed without argument, which told her exactly how much pain he was actually in. When he finished, he closed his eyes, breathing carefully. "The court's going to want answers," he said, "about the collapse, about Kael, about you. Let them want." Rhea sat down on the stool beside the table. "I'm not going anywhere until you're stable. That could be days. Then I'll be here for days." His eyes open, searching her face. "Why?" "Because you're my patient, and I don't let my patients die from stupidity." She leaned back. "Also because Kira said someone's probably going to try to kill me, and I figure I'm safer in here with guards than wandering around the fortress alone." "She's right." Draxion's expression darkened. "Torvin won't accept this. He'll see your victory as a direct challenge. Everything I do is a direct challenge to him." Rhea shrugged. "But I've got other problems, like keeping you from re-injuring yourself. So Torvin can get in line." The door opened. Kira entered, carrying a tray of food, and stopped when she saw Draxion awake. "You look like hell," she said bluntly. "I feel worse." Draction tried to shift position and stopped when Ria's hand landed on his shoulder. Don't move. Ria took the tray from Kira, bread, cheese, some kind of stew. This for me? For both of you, though I wasn't sure he'd be conscious. Kira studied Draxion. Can you fight? Not for at least a week, Ria answered before he could. His spine needs time to fully stabilize. Any combat before then risks permanent damage. That's a problem, Kira said, because Kael's forces are regrouping outside the northern pass. They're not attacking, but they're not leaving either. They're waiting to see if he survives the collapse, Draxion said. If I can't fight, they'll press the advantage. Then we don't let them know you can't fight. Ria handed him a piece of bread. Eat. You need the energy. We can't hold a siege for a week, Kira said. Our supplies are strained, the walls are damaged, and morale is fine. Draxion interrupted. They just watched a slum mechanic defeat a warlord using cables and architecture. They know we can win. They know she can win, Kira corrected, which is a different problem. Half the fortress thinks she's some kind of tactical genius. The other half thinks she's a threat to the established order. Which half is bigger? Ria asked. Depends on the hour. Kira's smile was grim. But Torvin's half is louder and better organized. Then we need to be better organized than them. Draxion tried to sit up again. Ria pushed him back down. You're not going anywhere, she said firmly. Let me handle Torvin. Both Draxion and Kira stared at her. You? Kira said. Handle a man who's been playing court politics for 40 years? I handled a frost warlord with cable and falling rocks. How hard can one old man be? Ria grabbed a piece of bread for herself. Besides, I've got something he doesn't. Which is? I've got nothing to lose. Ria bit into the bread. He's fighting to maintain power. I'm fighting to keep working. Different motivations, different tactics, different chance of survival, Kira muttered. Probably. Ria looked at Draxion. Do you trust me? He didn't hesitate. Yes. Then let me deal with the court. You focus on healing. She stood, grabbing her bag. Kira, I need you to spread a rumor. What kind of rumor? Tell everyone that the king is recovering faster than expected, that he'll be combat ready within 3 days. Ria moved toward the door. Make it loud. Make sure it reaches Kael's forces. That's a lie, Kira said. That's strategy. If they think Draxion is healing fast, they'll be less likely to attack. Buys us the time he actually needs. Ria paused at the door. Also, I need to know where Torvin is right now. Council chambers. He's been there since the battle ended. It's perfect. Ria smiled, and it wasn't a nice expression. Time to have a conversation about tradition. You're going alone? Draxion tried to rise again. Ria, stay. Down. She pointed at him. If I come back and you've moved, I'm going to be very unhappy, and you don't want me unhappy when I'm holding surgical instruments. She left before he could argue. The corridors were busier than before. Workers repairing damage, soldiers on patrol. And everywhere, people stopped to stare at her, some with respect, some with fear, some with barely concealed hostility. Ria ignored them all. The council chambers were in the central tower, behind doors carved with the kingdom's seal. 2 guards stood outside, both looking uncertain when Ria approached. I need to speak with the council, she said. They're in session, one guard said. No interruptions. Then interrupt them. Ria crossed her arms. Or I can go back to the king and tell him his council refused to see the person who just saved his fortress. Your choice. The guards exchanged glances. One of them opened the door. The council chamber was exactly what Ria expected. Vaulted ceiling, long table, 24 courtiers in expensive robes, all turning to stare at her like she'd tracked mud onto a silk carpet. Torvin sat at the head of the table. His expression when he saw her was briefly, satisfyingly murderous before he smoothed it into cold politeness. Miss Calder, he said, this is a closed session. Then open it. Ria walked to the center of the chamber. We need to talk about the eastern wall. The wall you collapsed, Lord Venn said, his tone accusing. The wall I collapsed on Kael Frostborn, yes. Rhea looked around the table. Which saved this fortress and everyone in it. You're welcome, by the way. You destroyed a fortification that took decades to build, Lady Cirith said coldly. The damage will take months to repair. The alternative was Kyle burning this entire fortress to the ground with all of you in it. Rhea planted her hands on the table. So yes, I sacrificed one wall to save the kingdom. Again, you're welcome. Your arrogance is astounding, Torvin said. You speak to this council as if you have authority here. You have none.
I have the authority the king gave me when he made me responsible for his medical care, which means I have a vested interest in keeping this fortress intact so my patient can recover. Rhea leaned forward, and right now, the biggest threat to his recovery isn't Kael's army, it's you. The room went silent. Explain, Torvin said, his voice dangerous. You're so busy trying to undermine me that you're undermining him. Rhea straightened.
You want me gone because I threaten your power structure. Fine, I get it. But while you're plotting against a mechanic, there's an army outside your walls waiting for an opportunity. If you spent half the energy you're using on me on actually defending this kingdom, we wouldn't be in this mess. How dare you? Lady Cirith started. How dare I what? Tell the truth? Rhea turned to face her. The king was injured for 3 centuries because you people were too concerned with tradition and politics to actually fix him. I fixed him in one morning. Then you tried to have me removed because it made you look bad. And when that didn't work, you… what? Decided to wait until I fail, hope I get killed in battle, poison my food? She saw it. Just a flicker. A guilty glance from Lord Venn toward Torvin. You did, Rhea said, pieces clicking together. You actually tried to poison me. That's an absurd accusation, Torvin said, but his voice was too controlled. Is it? Rhea pulled the vial from her bag, the painkiller she'd given Draction. She'd grabbed the wrong one deliberately, betting on this exact moment. Because I found this in my quarters this morning. Clear liquid, tasteless, and according to the medical texts I've been reading, a very effective poison. It was a complete bluff. The vial was harmless. But she watched Torvin's face and knew she was right. You have no proof, he said. I don't need proof. I need you to understand something. Rhea set the vial on the table. You can't kill me, because if I die, the king's medical care falls back to your court healers, the same people who failed him for 3 centuries. And when he realizes they can't maintain his recovery, when his spine starts degrading again, he'll know exactly who to blame. You're bluffing, Lady Cirith said. Am I? Rhea smiled. Test me. Go ahead, kill me. See what happens when the king is back in constant pain and has no one to fix it except the healers he already doesn't trust. She could see the calculation in their eyes, the realization that she was right, that killing her now would be worse than letting her live. There's another option, Torvin said slowly. We could simply remove you from the fortress, send you away with enough gold to ensure your silence. You'd be comfortable, safe, and out of our way. Not interested. Think carefully, Miss Calder. The court's resources are considerable. We could make your life very difficult. You mean more difficult than collapsing buildings on dragon warlords? Rhea laughed. I've spent 8 years fixing broken creatures in a slum while dodging mining accidents and fires. Your political games don't scare me. They should, Lord Venn said quietly. You've made powerful enemies. I've made insecure enemies. Rhea picked up the vial. There's a difference. Powerful people don't need to poison mechanics. Insecure people do. Torvin's face went carefully blank. What do you want? I want you to do your jobs. Defend the fortress. Support the king. Stop wasting energy trying to get rid of me and use it to protect this kingdom. Rhea moved toward the door. Oh, and one more thing. I'm going to be examining all of the king's food and medication personally from now on. If anything happens to him, anything, I'll know who's responsible. And I'll make sure everyone else knows too. You can't threaten this council, Lady Cirith said. I'm not threatening, I'm promising. Rhea opened the door. The difference is I actually follow through. She left before they could respond, her heart hammering. That had been the riskiest play of her life.
But she'd seen their faces, seen the calculation shift. They couldn't kill her, not without making things worse for themselves. She'd just changed the entire power dynamic of the court using nothing but logic and bluffing. Kira was waiting outside. That was insane. How much did you hear? All of it. Guards talk. Kira fell into step beside her. You just declared war on the entire council. I declared a truce, they just don't know it yet. Rhea headed back toward the surgical suite. They can't afford to kill me. I can't afford to leave, so we're stuck with each other. That's not a truce. That's a standoff. Same thing, different name. Rhea pushed open the surgical suite door. Draxion was sitting up. I told you not to move, what Rhea said. You were gone for an hour. I was worried. He looked past her to Kira. What happened? She just threatened the entire council with exposure if anything happens to you, bluffed them into thinking she has evidence of a poisoning attempt, and essentially made herself indispensable in one conversation. Kira sounded impressed, despite herself. It was beautiful. It was necessary, Rhea corrected. She moved to check Draxion's back. Lie down. You're still healing. I'm fine. You're stubborn. There's a difference. She pressed on his spine. He flinched. See? Pain means not fine. Lie. Down. He obeyed, but his eyes stayed on her face. You confronted Torvin alone. I confronted the council. Torvin was just the loudest voice. Rhea checked the bandages. The repair is holding. But you've got inflammation from moving too soon. Rest. Actually rest this time. I need to address the fortress. They need to know their king is recovering and will be back to full strength soon, which is what Kira is spreading. Rhea pulled a fresh bandage from the cabinet. What they don't need is to see you weak, so you stay here, you heal, and you let me handle the court. You can't fight them alone. I'm not fighting them. I'm negotiating from a position they didn't realize I had. Rhea started replacing the bandages. They need you functional. I'm the only one who can keep you functional. That gives me leverage. That makes you a target. I was already a target. Now I'm a target they can't afford to hit. She finished the bandaging. There. You're stable. Now actually rest, or I'm going to start using sedatives. Draxion caught her wrist. Thank you. For what? Doing my job? For being here. For fighting for this. For... He stopped, searching for words. For not running when any sane person would have. I told you. I'm not particularly sane. Rhea pulled her hand free, deflecting again. Sleep. I'll be here when you wake up. She meant it as reassurance, but the way he looked at her made it feel like something more. Kira cleared her throat. I'll post guards outside, just in case Torvin gets creative. Good idea. Rhea settled onto the stool beside the surgical table. Wake me if anything happens. Kira left. The surgical suite fell quiet except for the sound of Draxion's breathing evening out as exhaustion finally dragged him under. Rhea stayed awake, watching him sleep, her mind racing through possibilities and problems. The court wouldn't accept her. Not really, but they couldn't remove her either, not without consequences they weren't willing to face. It wasn't victory, but it was something close to it. She must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, someone was shaking her shoulder. She came awake with her hand on a scalpel, ready to fight. It was Kira, and her expression was grim. What? Rhea asked. Kale's awake. They've cleared enough rubble to free him. Kira's jaw was tight, and he's demanding to speak with you. Rhea's stomach dropped. Me? Specifically you. Says he won't negotiate with anyone else. Kira glanced at Draxion, still unconscious. The council is debating whether to hand you over. Of course they are. Rhea stood. Where is he? Still partially buried, but conscious and coherent. Kira paused. You don't have to do this. We can refuse. And then what? He breaks free and attacks again? Rhea grabbed her bag. No. If he wants to talk, I'll talk. Rhea. Draxion's voice, rough with sleep and pain. Stay down, she said without looking at him. I'll be back. Don't. I said I'll be back. She followed Kira to the door. Trust me. She didn't wait for his response. The eastern wall was still a disaster zone. Rubble everywhere. Support teams working to clear the debris.
And in the center of the collapsed section, partially visible under tons of stone, was Kael. His massive dragon form was trapped, wings pinned, only his head and part of his neck free. But his eyes were alert, intelligent, and fixed on Rhea as she approached. "The mechanic," he said, his voice grinding ice. "You're smaller than I expected. You're more talkative than I expected for someone buried under a building." Rhea stopped 10 feet away, close enough to talk but far enough to run if needed. "What do you want?" "To understand how you did it." Kael's eyes studied her. "I've fought for 2 centuries, conquered 17 kingdoms, never been defeated, and a human with no magic, no combat training, no military background defeated me with cables and architecture. And you want what? Lessons? I want to know if you're for sale." That stopped Rhea cold. "What?" "Work for me. Leave this dying kingdom. I'll give you resources. Position. Everything you need to practice your craft." Kael's smile was sharp. "You're wasted here, fighting a court that hates you to protect a king who'll eventually get himself killed." "Not interested." "You haven't heard my offer." "Don't need to." Rhea crossed her arms. "I'm not leaving." "Why?" Kael's head tilted. "Loyalty? Please. You've been here 3 days. Loyalty takes years." "Not loyalty. Stubbornness." Rhea stepped closer. "I started a job. I'm going to finish it. The king's spine, among other things. She studied the trapped warlord. You're going to attack again when you get free." "Of course. You'll lose again." "Will I?" Kael's eyes glinted. "You won't have the element of surprise next time. I'll be ready for your tricks. Then I'll come up with new tricks." Rhea pulled a scalpel from her bag. "Or I could just make sure you don't get free." The rubble around Kael shifted as he tensed. "You're threatening me?" "I'm stating facts. You're trapped, injured, vulnerable." Rhea tossed the scalpel from hand to hand. "I know exactly where to cut to make sure you never fight again. Your wing joints, the nerve clusters in your neck, the soft tissue under your scales. You wouldn't dare." "Why not? You tried to kill the king, tried to destroy the fortress, gave me a very stressful few days." Rhea caught the scalpel. "I've got plenty of reasons." Kael stared at her. Then he started laughing, a sound like glaciers calving. "You're bluffing." "Maybe." Rhea shrugged. "Want to find out?" The laughter stopped. Kael's expression shifted to something like respect. "You're either very brave or very stupid. I've heard that before." Rhea pocketed the scalpel. "Here's what's going to happen. Your forces are going to retreat, all of them, past the northern border, and they're going to stay there." "Or what? Or I finish digging you out myself, and I'm not particularly gentle when I'm annoyed." Rhea stepped closer. "You're a warlord. You understand strength. Well, I just defeated you twice. That makes me stronger. So either accept the loss and retreat, or I'll make sure you can't fly again." Kael's eyes narrowed. "The king would never allow—" "The king is unconscious and recovering. I'm making the decisions right now." Rhea held his gaze. "So, what's it going to be?" For a long moment, Kael just stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. "I'll retreat," he said. "For now. But this isn't over, mechanic. I'll be back. I'll be here." Rhea turned to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and Kael, next time you try to kill my patient, make sure you succeed, because if you just injure him, I'll fix it, and then I'll come find you." She left him there, trapped under rubble, probably planning his revenge. Kira was waiting at the edge of the debris field. "Did you just threaten a warlord?" "I negotiated." Rhea kept walking. "There's a difference. You threatened to cripple him. I negotiated aggressively." Rhea headed back toward the surgical suite. "Did it work?" "His forces are already pulling back. Scouts confirmed it." Kira fell into step. "I don't know whether to be impressed or horrified." "Be both. I am." Rhea pushed open the surgical suite door. Draction was sitting up again, and this time there were 3 guards in the room with him. "I told them to keep you from moving," Rhea said. "They tried." Draxion's expression was tight with worry and anger. "You went to Kael alone.
I went to Kale with guards nearby and a very good understanding of dragon anatomy. Rhea shooed the guards out, and I got him to retreat.
You're welcome. You could have been killed, but I wasn't. She moved to check his spine. Now lie down before I have to sedate you. Rhea, down, now. He obeyed, but his eyes stayed on her face. What did you say to him? I offered him a choice between retreating peacefully or being permanently grounded. Rhea checked the inflammation. It was down slightly. Good. He chose retreat. You threatened a warlord. I negotiated with a trapped enemy using the only leverage I had. Rhea grabbed fresh bandages. Strategy, not threats. The court is going to accept it because Kael's forces are leaving and the fortress is safe. Rhea started rebandaging. They can hate me all they want. As long as they're alive to hate me, I did my job. Draxion was quiet for a moment. Then he started laughing. Genuine, full laughter that made him wince and grab his ribs. What? Rhea demanded. You've been here 3 days and you've defeated a warlord twice, threatened the council, negotiated a retreat, and made yourself the most powerful person in the fortress without magic, military rank, or political position. He looked at her. You're incredible. Rhea felt heat rise in her face. I'm practical. You're both. His hand found hers. Thank you. For everything. She should pull away, should deflect, should maintain the professional distance that kept things simple. Instead, she squeezed his hand once. You're welcome. Now rest. Actually rest. Or I swear I'll sedate you. I believe you. But he was smiling. Outside, the fortress was already changing. Word spread fast. Kael's retreat, Rhea's negotiation, the mechanic who'd saved them all without magic or military training. The court could hate her, could plot against her, could refuse to accept her, but they couldn't deny what she'd accomplished. And in a kingdom built on strength, that was the only currency that mattered. 3 weeks after Kael's retreat, Torvin made his final move. And it wasn't poison, sabotage, or any of the subtle methods Rhea had been expecting. It was law. She was in the surgical suite, checking Draxion's recovery. The spine was healing better than expected, full range of motion restored, no pain even during transformation, when Kira arrived with a document that made Rhea's stomach drop. You need to see this, Kira said, handing over the scroll. Rhea read it twice, her disbelief growing with each word. They're challenging my legitimacy? On every possible ground. Kira's expression was grim. No formal medical training, no credentials recognized by the court, no legal right to practice medicine within the fortress, and therefore no legal standing to maintain your position here. This is insane. Rhea looked at Draxion, who was reading over her shoulder. They're using bureaucracy as a weapon. It's effective, Draxion said quietly. If the council votes to invalidate your position, I can override it, but it'll create a constitutional crisis. The king versus the council. It could fracture the entire government. So they're forcing you to choose between keeping me and maintaining stability. Rhea crumpled the scroll. That's actually clever. Torvin's learning. This isn't funny, Draxion said. I'm not laughing. Rhea started pacing. When's the vote? Tomorrow, noon, public session in the throne room. Kira leaned against the wall. They're making it a spectacle. Maximum pressure. Of course they are. Rhea's mind was racing. What are my options? Legally? None. Kira's tone was blunt. You have no credentials, no formal training, no documentation proving competency. By court law, you shouldn't be practicing medicine at all. But I fixed what their trained healers couldn't. Doesn't matter. The law is the law. Kira paused. Unless you can find a legal precedent that supports your position. Where would I find that? The archives. Legal section, 3rd floor, but it's 3 centuries of documents. You'd need weeks to... Rhea was already moving toward the door. I've got 18 hours. That'll have to be enough. The legal archives were worse than Rhea had imagined. Shelf after shelf of documents written in archaic formal language, half of them barely legible, covering everything from trade disputes to succession laws. She started with medical regulations, pulling every text that mentioned healing, treatment, or physician credentials. 6 hours in, she'd found nothing useful, just endless documentation of the guild system, the training requirements, the rigid hierarchies that had been in place for centuries. She was ready to give up when she found it. A small notation in a text from 200 years ago, referenced in a footnote so obscure she almost missed it. The law of martial exception. Rhea pulled the source text, a crumbling leather-bound volume that fell open to a page marked with ancient ink. Her hands shook as she read. In times of war, when the kingdom faces existential threat, any individual who provides material aid in defense of the realm is granted provisional authority regardless of formal credentials, provided their contribution is verified by military command and approved by the sovereign. Rhea read it 3 more times to make sure she understood. Then she started laughing. Because Torven had made a critical mistake. He'd challenged her legitimacy. But in doing so, he'd ignored the fact that she'd fought in a war, saved the fortress, defeated Kael twice, and the law of martial exception specifically covered exactly that situation. She grabbed the text and ran. Draxion was sleeping when she burst into the surgical suite. She woke him without ceremony. "I found it," she said, shoving the book at him. "Legal precedent. Read." He read, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something that looked like vindication. The martial exception. It's been on the books for 2 centuries, never repealed, just forgotten.
Rhea was grinning. Torven thinks he's got me trapped in bureaucracy, but the law he's using to attack me is the same law that protects me. "You'll need military verification," Draxion said, sitting up carefully. "Proof that you provided material aid. Kira can provide that. She documented everything, the cable placement, the wall collapse, Kael's defeat." Rhea grabbed paper and started writing. "And you can provide sovereign approval, which I'll give without hesitation." Draxion stood, testing his balance. The spine held perfectly. "But you'll still need to present this to the council yourself. They won't accept it coming from me." "Then I'll present it." Rhea kept writing. "I'm going to need witnesses, documentation, a full legal argument. You have until noon tomorrow. Then I'd better work fast." She spent the night preparing. Kira provided written testimony of Rhea's actions during both battles. The military commanders submitted reports detailing the strategic value of her interventions. Even some of the soldiers who'd helped with the cable placement volunteered statements. By dawn, Rhea had a case. Not perfect. There were gaps, technicalities, potential challenges, but it was solid, and more importantly, it was legal. The throne room was packed when she arrived. Every courtier in the fortress, half the military command, and what looked like a significant portion of the general population crowded into the chamber. Torven had made this public deliberately, expecting a show trial that would humiliate her. He was about to get a different kind of show. Draxion sat on his throne. The first time he'd been able to sit there without pain in 3 centuries. His presence alone was a statement. Fully healed. Fully functional. Living proof of Rhea's competence. Torven stood at the center of the chamber, flanked by Lady Cirith and Lord Ven. His smile was confident as he addressed the assembled crowd. "We are gathered today to address a matter of law and tradition," he began. "Miss Rhea Calder has been practicing medicine within this fortress without credentials, without training, and without legal authority. While we acknowledge her fortunate success with the king's injury, we cannot allow sentiment to override law. The medical guild has clear requirements. Miss Calder meets none of them. Therefore, we move to invalidate her position and remove her from the fortress." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some approving, some uncertain. "Does the accused have anything to say?" Torven looked at Rhea with barely concealed triumph. "I do." Rhea stepped forward. She was wearing the same clothes she'd worn that first day, work clothes still stained with grease and blood. A deliberate choice. "You're right, I have no formal credentials, no guild training, no recognition from the medical establishment." Torvin's smile widened. "Then you admit, I admit those facts, but they're irrelevant." Rhea pulled the legal text from her bag. "Because I'm not claiming authority under medical law.
I'm claiming it under the law of martial exception. The smile froze on Torvin's face. The what? The law of martial exception, established 200 years ago, never repealed. Rhea held up the book. It states that in times of war, any individual who provides material aid in defense of the realm is granted provisional authority regardless of credentials, provided their contribution is verified by military command and approved by the sovereign. She turned to Kira. Commander, would you verify my contribution during the recent conflict? Kira stepped forward, her testimony crisp and professional. Miss Calder's intervention during the first assault prevented the loss of the lower battalion. Her strategic use of fortress architecture during the second assault resulted in the defeat and capture of Kael Frostborn. Her medical treatment of the king enabled him to fight at full capacity. Without her contributions, this fortress would have fallen. And you can document this? Rhea asked. I have written reports from 3 commanders, 17 soldiers, and my own direct observation. Kira handed the documents to Rhea, all verified and sealed. Rhea turned to Draxion. Your Majesty, as sovereign, do you approve the use of martial exception in this case? I do. Draxion's voice carried across the chamber. Miss Calder's contributions to the defense of this kingdom are verified and documented. By the law of martial exception, she has full legal authority to practice medicine within this fortress. The chamber erupted, courtiers shouting, soldiers cheering. Torvin's face going from confident to pale to purple with rage. This is a manipulation of obscure law, he shouted over the noise. A technicality. It's the law, Rhea said calmly. The same law you were trying to use against me. I just used it better. You have no right. I have every right. It's written right here. Rhea held up the text. You challenged my legitimacy. I proved it legally. That's how this works. Torvin turned to the other courtiers. This is exactly what I warned you about. She's undermining our entire system. Well, I'm using your system, Rhea corrected. Your laws, your precedents. I just actually read them instead of assuming tradition would protect me. The Medical Guild will never accept this, Lady Cirith said. Then the Medical Guild can challenge it in court. But until they do, I have legal standing. Rhea looked around the chamber. And just so we're clear, I don't want your acceptance. I don't need it. I have legal authority, royal approval, and military verification. What I want is for you to stop wasting energy trying to remove me and start using it to rebuild this fortress. You arrogant, Lord Venn started. Practical, Rhea interrupted. I'm practical. There's a difference. She turned to Draxion. Your Majesty, I have one more request. Go ahead. I want the Medical Guild's training requirements changed. Not just for me, for everyone. Rhea pulled out another document. I've drafted a proposal. Apprenticeship-based training alongside traditional guild education. Practical experience given equal weight to theoretical study. And most importantly, competency testing that's actually about skill, not connections or money. The chamber went quiet. Even Torvin looked surprised. You're reforming the entire medical system? Draxion asked. I'm fixing what's broken. Same thing I've been doing since I got here. Rhea handed him the proposal. The guild system has been failing people for centuries. It failed you. It fails everyone who can't afford the training fees or doesn't have the right connections. If I'm going to have legal authority, I want to use it to make sure the next person like me doesn't have to fight this hard. Draxion read the proposal. His expression shifted to something like pride. This is ambitious. This is necessary. It'll face resistance. Everything worthwhile does. Rhea crossed her arms. But I just defeated a warlord and outsmarted the council using their own laws. I can handle some resistance. Draxion stood. The movement was fluid, unrestricted, powerful. The entire chamber could see the difference. The proposal is approved. Implementation to begin immediately. Your Majesty, you can't, Torvin started. I can, and I am. Draxion descended from the throne. For 3 centuries, I was told my injury was incurable, told to accept my limitations, told that tradition and expertise knew best. Miss Calder proved all of that wrong in a single morning. She's earned the right to reform a system that failed so catastrophically. This is unprecedented, Lady Sirith said. Good. It's time for some precedents to change. Draxion looked at Torvin. You challenged her legitimacy. She proved it legally. You lost. Accept it and move on, or find yourself permanently removed from this court. Torvin's jaw worked. For a moment, Rhea thought he might actually challenge the king directly. Then his shoulders sagged. I withdraw the challenge, he said quietly. Louder, Draxion said. I withdraw the challenge. Torvin's voice was stronger now, edged with humiliation. Miss Calder's position is legitimate. The words clearly hurt him. Rhea almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Thank you, she said. Now, if we're done with the theatrics, I have patients waiting. She turned and walked out of the throne room, her heart hammering but her steps steady. Behind her, she heard the chamber erupt again, some in approval, some in outrage, all of them loud. She didn't care. She'd won. Kira caught up with her in the corridor. That was the most satisfying thing I've ever witnessed. It was necessary. Rhea headed toward the surgical suite. How long until someone challenges the medical reforms? 3 days? Maybe 4? Kira fell into step. But you've got momentum now. The soldiers support you. The commoners support you. Even some of the minor nobility are starting to come around. What about Torvin? He's finished, not removed. He's too connected for that, but his influence is broken. Kira paused. You did that. You destroyed a 40-year political career using nothing but law books and logic. I used his own weapons against him. Rhea pushed open the surgical suite door. He challenged me on legal grounds. I responded on legal grounds. Fair fight. Except it wasn't fair. You were smarter. I was more motivated. Rhea grabbed her medical bag. He was fighting to maintain power. I was fighting to keep working. Different stakes. A knock on the door. One of the fortress guards. Miss Calder, there's someone here to see you, from the slums. Rhea's stomach dropped. She hadn't been back to the Ashmark district since the day they'd dragged her to the fortress. Hadn't thought about her old workshop, her old life, any of it. Who? She asked. Says his name is Marcus, Drake owner. Says you fixed his courier last month. The merchant, the nervous one with the torn wing membrane. Rhea remembered him. Send him in. Marcus entered, looking completely out of place in the fortress corridors. He clutched his hat in both hands, his eyes wide. Miss Calder, he said, I heard what happened, about the battles, about you staying here. Word travels fast. Everyone in the slums is talking about it. The mechanic who became whatever you are now. He twisted the hat. I came because there are others, people who need help, people the guild healers won't see because they can't afford the fees. I know, Rhea said quietly. I was wondering, hoping, really, if you'd come back, even just sometimes, because you're the only one who— I can't come back, Rhea interrupted. Not to stay, but I can send someone. She turned to Kira. The medical reform proposal includes apprenticeship positions. I'm going to need people to train, people who understand what it's like to work with limited resources. You're recruiting from the slums, Kira said. I'm recruiting people who actually want to help instead of just maintaining status. Rhea looked at Marcus. Spread the word. Anyone who wants to learn bone mechanics, real practical medicine, tell them to come to the fortress. I'll teach them myself. Marcus stared at her. You're serious? Completely. The guild system is broken. If I'm going to fix it, I need people who understand why it needs fixing. Rhea pulled out paper and started writing. Here. This is a formal invitation. Bring it to the fortress gates. They'll let you in. I don't know anything about medicine, Marcus said. Neither did I when I started. You'll learn. Rhea handed him the paper. And Marcus? Bring the Drake. I want to check that wing repair. He left, still looking stunned. Kira waited until he was gone before speaking. You're building an entire medical program from scratch, she said. I'm fixing what's broken, like I always do. Rhea sat down, suddenly exhausted. The guild system favors wealth over skill. If I'm going to change that, I need to train people who don't fit their mold. The guild will fight you. Let them. I've got legal authority now, and royal backing. Rhea leaned back. Besides, they can't argue with results. If my apprentices are more competent than their trained healers, the guild loses credibility. You're playing a long game. I'm planning for the future. Rhea closed her eyes. This fortress, this kingdom, it can't survive on tradition and rigid hierarchies. It needs adaptability, innovation, people who solve problems instead of maintaining them. The door opened again. This time it was Draxion, moving with the easy confidence of someone whose body finally worked the way it should. You started a revolution, he said. I started a medical program. Same thing, in this kingdom. He sat down beside her. The council is in chaos. Half of them want to impeach me for supporting you. The other half are scrambling to figure out how to benefit from the reforms. Good. Chaos means change is happening. Rhea opened her eyes. How's the spine? Perfect. No pain. Full mobility. I can transform without hesitation. He flexed his shoulders, demonstrating. I owe you everything. You owe me a functioning workshop and access to the archives, which you already provided. Rhea stood. We're even. We're not even close to even. Drexian stood as well. You changed my life, the kingdom's future, the entire power structure of the court. I fixed a spine and used basic logic. Stop making it poetic. It is poetic. You came here as a prisoner and became the most influential person in the fortress. I became the most useful person in the fortress. There's a difference. Rhea started organizing her medical supplies. Influence is temporary, usefulness lasts. You're impossible, Draxion said, but he was smiling. I'm practical. Rhea looked at him. And speaking of practical, you need regular checkups. That spine is healed, but it needs monitoring. Weekly examinations for the next 3 months, monthly after that. You're giving me medical orders? I'm giving you professional advice. There's a difference. She pulled out her schedule. I've got time Thursday mornings. Don't be late. I'm the king, and I'm your doctor. Thursday mornings. Mark it down. He laughed, and the sound was different than before. Lighter, free of the pain that had defined him for centuries. Thursday mornings. I'll be here. Good. Rhea made a note in her schedule. Now get out. I have apprentices to recruit and a medical program to design. He headed for the door, then paused. Rhea? Yeah? Thank you. For everything. For not giving up. For fighting. For being too stubborn to run when you should have. You're welcome. She didn't look up from her notes. Now go rule your kingdom. I've got work to do. He left, and Rhea allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to feel the weight of what she'd accomplished. She'd come to this fortress as a prisoner, survived assassination attempts, defeated a warlord, reformed the legal system, changed the entire medical establishment, and somehow, impossibly, she'd done it all by just being herself. Practical, stubborn, unwilling to accept that broken things couldn't be fixed. 6 months later, the fortress looked different. The eastern wall had been rebuilt, stronger this time, with the structural improvements Rhea had suggested. The surgical suite had expanded into 3 floors, housing 12 apprentices ranging from former slum workers to minor nobility who'd been rejected by the guild. Rhea's clinic, because that's what it had become, operated 6 days a week. She handled the complex cases personally, while her apprentices worked on standard injuries under supervision. The results spoke for themselves. Recovery times were faster, complications were fewer, and word had spread beyond the kingdom's borders. People came from neighboring territories specifically to be treated at Rhea's clinic. Some brought payment. Some brought nothing but hope. She treated them all the same. The medical guild had challenged her reforms twice. Both times, Rhea had buried them in documentation, legal precedent, and comparative outcomes that proved her methods worked better than theirs. The guild was slowly, reluctantly, beginning to adopt her training model. Torvin had left the fortress. Not banished, Draxion had been merciful, but his influence was gone. Lady Cirith had shifted her support to Rhea's reforms once she'd realized the economic benefits of better health care. Lord Ven had simply disappeared into obscurity. The court still had its factions, its politics, its endless maneuvering, but Rhea had carved out a space outside that system. She answered to the king,
and to her patients. Nobody else. She was in the clinic when Kira found her, holding a letter sealed with unfamiliar wax. "This just arrived," Kira said. "From the Northern Territories." Rhea opened it, read it twice, then started laughing. "What?" Kira asked. "It's from Kael." Rhea handed her the letter. Kira read aloud. "To the mechanic who defeated me, I write to inform you that I have withdrawn my forces from all contested territories and returned to my northern holdings. Your threat to cripple me was persuasive, but more than that, your victory was earned. I respect strength, and you have proven yours twice over. Should you ever tire of serving a kingdom that doesn't deserve you, my offer stands. You would have a place in my court. With respect, Kael Frostborn." "He's still trying to recruit you," Kira said. "He's acknowledging defeat." Rhea took the letter back. "That's actually impressive. Most warlords would just plot revenge. Are you going to respond?" "Maybe. Thanks but no thanks seems appropriate." Rhea filed the letter away. "How's the new apprentice working out? The one from the mining district?" "Sarah? She's good. Quick learner. Already mastered basic suturing." Kira leaned against the doorframe. "You're building something here, something permanent." "I'm training people who will be better than me eventually." Rhea checked her schedule. "That's the point. I'm not trying to be irreplaceable. I'm trying to make sure broken things get fixed even when I'm not around." "That's surprisingly wise." "Don't sound so surprised." Rhea grabbed her bag. "I've got a house call. Dragon with a wing injury. Should be back by evening." She headed out through the fortress, which had become familiar over the months. The corridors she'd first walked as a prisoner were now just her daily route. The courtiers who'd sneered at her now nodded with varying degrees of respect or resentment. The soldiers saluted. It still felt surreal sometimes. The dragon with the wing injury was a minor noble's mount, injured during a training exercise. Rhea assessed the damage, torn membrane, strained joint, and got to work. The repair took 3 hours. The dragon's owner tried to pay her in gold. She refused. "Donate it to the apprentice fund," she said. "We're always needing supplies." By the time she returned to the fortress, the sun was setting. The volcanic vents cast the sky in shades of orange and red. The slums were visible in the distance, still sprawling and chaotic, still home to people who couldn't afford the guild healers. But now there was another option. Her clinic, her apprentices, a system that valued skill over status. It wasn't enough. There was still so much work to do. But it was a start. She found Draction in the eastern courtyard, the place where she'd first performed the repair. He was in dragon form, testing his mobility, wings spread wide. When he saw her, he transformed back. "How's the wing repair?" he asked. "Successful. Should be fully healed in 2 weeks." Rhea watched him move. "You're still favoring your left side slightly." "Am I?" "Barely noticeable, but yes." She moved closer. "Let me check." He turned without argument, lifting his shirt. Rhea's hands moved over his spine, completely healed now, the repair so successful it was almost invisible, but there was slight tension in the surrounding muscles. "You're compensating for old habits," she said. "Your spine is healed, but your body remembers the pain. You're unconsciously protecting an injury that doesn't exist anymore. Can you fix it?" "It's not a medical problem. It's a mental one." Rhea stepped back. "You need to retrain your movement patterns. Consciously practice using your full range of motion until your body remembers it's allowed to." "That sounds like work." "It is work. Healing isn't just about fixing the injury. It's about learning to live without it." She pulled out a small notebook, sketching exercises. "Start with these, daily practice. Should take about a month to fully retrain the muscle memory. A month of homework from my doctor. A month of physical therapy from your bone mechanic." Rhea handed him the sketches. "Don't make me nag you about it." "I wouldn't dream of it." He studied the exercises. "You know, when they first dragged you here, I thought you'd last maybe a day before demanding to leave. I thought I'd last about an hour before you killed me for insubordination. And yet, here we are, 6 months later. You've revolutionized the medical system, reformed the court, and become the second most powerful person in the kingdom." "Third," Rhea corrected. "Kira's got more actual military authority than I do."
Kira doesn't have the king following her medical orders. The king should follow his doctor's orders. That's just common sense. Rhea sat down on the courtyard wall. Besides, I'm not powerful. I'm just competent, and everyone else set the bar really low. Draction sat beside her. You're impossible. You've said that before. It's still true. He was quiet for a moment. What you've built here, the clinic, the apprentices, the reforms, it's going to outlast both of us. That's the point. Rhea looked out at the fortress. I'm not trying to be a legend. I'm trying to fix a broken system so the next person like me doesn't have to fight this hard. You've succeeded. I've started. There's a difference. She pulled out her schedule, already filling with appointments for next week. Still so much to do. The apprentice program needs expansion. The supply chain needs optimization. I want to open satellite clinics in the outer territories. You're building an empire. I'm building a healthcare system. Different thing entirely. Rhea made notes. Though if we're talking about empires, you should probably focus on the northern border. Kael's behaving now, but that won't last forever. I have people monitoring him. Good, because if he breaks my repair work by attacking again, I'm going to be very annoyed. She glanced at him. How does it feel, being fully healed? Like being alive for the first time in 3 centuries. Draction flexed his shoulders. I'd forgotten what it was like to move without pain, to transform without hesitation. You gave me that. Well, I fixed a mechanical problem. You're the one living with the results. I'm living because of you. His hand found hers. Everything I am now, everything this kingdom is becoming, it started with you refusing to kneel in a throne room. Rhea felt heat rise in her face. I didn't kneel because I don't work for people who expect it. That's just practicality. It was courage. It was stubbornness. There's a difference. With you, I'm not sure there is. The Draxian's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Thank you for everything. For staying when you could have left. For fighting when you could have run. For being exactly yourself instead of what anyone expected. You're welcome. Rhea squeezed his hand once, then stood. Now, I need to check on the apprentices. Sarah was working on a complex suture earlier, and I want to see her progress. Always working. Always fixing what's broken. It's what I do. She headed toward the clinic entrance, then paused. Draction? Yeah? Thank you, too, for trusting me when no one else did. For backing the reforms. For not killing me when I told you your healers were idiots. That last one was touch and go for a moment. I know, I was there. She smiled. See you Thursday for your checkup. Don't be late. I'll be on time. I value my spine too much to risk your disapproval. Rhea left him there in the courtyard where everything had started, where she'd broken a centuries-old curse with her bare hands and changed the course of a kingdom without meaning to. The clinic was still busy when she arrived. 3 apprentices working on different cases, all of them focused, competent, applying the techniques she'd taught them. Sarah looked up when Rhea entered. The suture held, she said, showing her work. No complications. Good. Rhea examined the stitching, clean, even, professional. You're getting better. I had a good teacher. You had a stubborn teacher who refused to accept that broken things couldn't be fixed. Rhea made a note in Sarah's progress file. Keep practicing. In another 6 months, you'll be ready for complex cases. Really? Really. You've got the hands for it. And more importantly, you've got the mindset. Rhea looked around the clinic at her apprentices, at the patients being treated, at the system she'd built from nothing but necessity and refusal to quit. This is what matters. Not politics or power or recognition, just fixing what's broken and teaching others to do the same. Later, when the clinic finally closed and the apprentices had gone to their quarters, Rhea stood alone in the surgical suite, the same room where she'd first treated Draxian, where she'd stabilized him after Kael's attack, where she'd built something that mattered. The fortress was quiet now. The volcanic vents still glowed in the distance. The stars were coming out. She thought about the slums, about her old workshop, about the person she'd been 6 months ago, surviving, scraping by, fixing broken creatures because it was the only thing she knew how to do. She was still that person, still fixing broken things, but now she had resources, support, apprentices who would carry this work forward long after she was gone. She'd started this journey as a prisoner dragged to a fortress against her will. She was ending it as the architect of a revolution she'd never intended to start. And somehow, impossibly, she'd done it all by just refusing to kneel and insisting that broken things could be fixed. The surgical suite door opened. Draxion stood in the doorway, backlit by corridor torches. "You're still here," he said. "Just thinking." Rhea turned to face him, about how insane the last 6 months have been. "Any regrets?" She thought about it, really thought about it. The battles, the politics, the constant fighting, the threats, the exhaustion. "No," she said finally. "No regrets." "Good." He stepped into the room. "Because I have a question." "Professional or personal?" "Both." Draxion moved closer. "The kingdom is changing, becoming something different than it was, stronger, more adaptable, less dependent on tradition and more focused on results. That's what happens when you let competence matter more than credentials. That's what happens when you let the right person change things." He stopped in front of her. "I want you to make it official." "Make what official?" "Your position, not just as my doctor, as my partner, in ruling this kingdom." He held up a hand before she could interrupt. "Not marriage, not some political arrangement. A genuine partnership. Two people who balance each other. Strength and intelligence, power and precision." Rhea stared at him. "You're asking me to help run a kingdom. I'm asking you to keep doing what you're already doing, but with official authority to back it." Draxion's expression was serious. "You've already changed this place, made it better, stronger. I want to make sure that continues, that your work becomes permanent, that the next bone mechanic who shows up doesn't have to fight as hard as you did. That's a lot of responsibility. You've already been handling it. This just makes it legal." Rhea thought about the apprentices, the clinic, the reforms, all the work still left to do. "I'd need complete authority over the medical system." Done. "And the right to recruit anyone I think has potential, regardless of background." Already happening. "And no interference from the guild or the court." "You already won that battle." Rhea smiled. "Then yes, partners. But I'm still not kneeling. I'd be disappointed if you did." Draxion pulled her into a hug. Careful, respectful, warm. "Thank you. For everything. For being you." "You're welcome. Now let go before one of the apprentices walks in and starts rumors." "Too late. The entire fortress has been gossiping about us for months." "Wonderful." But Rhea was smiling as she pulled away. "I need to get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be busy." "Tomorrow's always busy with you. And it's going to stay that way." Rhea grabbed her bag. "Get some rest. Do your exercises. I'll see you Thursday." She left the surgical suite and headed to her quarters. No longer the guest rooms from that first night, but a permanent residence in the medical wing. Comfortable. Functional. Home. She collapsed onto the bed, exhausted but satisfied. Somewhere in the fortress, her apprentices were probably studying. Draxion was probably reviewing military reports. Kira was probably making sure the night watch was properly staffed. The kingdom kept moving, and Rhea Calder, former slum mechanic, current royal partner, permanent pain in the court's collective ass, had helped build something that would last long after she was gone. She'd fixed what was broken, and in doing so, she'd fixed herself. Outside, the volcanic frontier stretched into darkness. Dangerous, harsh, unforgiving, the kind of place where only the strong survived, but also the kind of place where a bone mechanic with grease under her nails could become the most respected force in the realm, where intelligence mattered as much as strength, where courage and adaptability could rewrite the rules of power, where broken things could be fixed if you were stubborn enough to try. And as Rhea drifted off to sleep, she smiled, because tomorrow there would be more work, more problems to solve, more broken things to fix, and she wouldn't have it any other way.